Hello and welcome back to Indistinct Chatter. I'm Eliza and happy belated Independence Day. Our country just turned 250 years old. How amazing, right? Just a baby, really, but still. But can I ask you something though? Did the vibes feel off to anyone else this year? Like the 4th is usually very patriotic, fun, festive. Growing up, there was always like a parade. There's a carnival or the fair, whatever you want to call it. And if it wasn't in your town, it was in the next town over, or the next town over after that. We would see red, white, and blue everywhere. Maybe there was even a community breakfast or a big community grill out. And of course, the fireworks. But you want to know something about fireworks? Just a little side note here. I always assumed fireworks were my favorite part. I never wanted to miss them until last year. We went camping during the 4th of July and skipped them entirely, and I didn't miss them at all. I don't even think I thought about them until a few days later, and I was like, oh, okay, so that theory's dead. However, with that being said, this year I was looking forward to maybe watching fireworks from my balcony. We have a view of America's mountain right there. But as you know, Colorado is on fire right now, and what isn't actively burning is just a really dry tinderbox waiting to explode. So the show got canceled, rightfully so. Still, a few people set them off around town anyway, which, if you did get fined for that, be glad that's all you got and that you weren't pinned for the next neighborhood or forest fire. Anyway, so if it wasn't the fireworks, what was I actually missing? Because clearly I was feeling off about this year's celebration. And I think what I was missing was the collective feeling of it all, the sense that a whole country is celebrating something together. This year, I didn't really get that vibe. I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that united celebration. Sure, I saw people in their red, white, and blue. I saw a lot of flags. Unfortunately, I did see a lot of political flags that weren't really giving the feelings of togetherness, you know? And aside from that, I brought up a couple episodes back how corporate blanding has crept into the way we talk. Well, I think it's crept into the way we celebrate too. We went to an annual celebration nearby in a small town, and I was kind of hoping that it would be a little nostalgic, maybe a little bit historic, like leaning into themes of what makes this country so great, all that good stuff, maybe some forefathers walking around, or even an Uncle Sam, maybe some sort of presentation. But aside from the dancing, it was basically just a food truck rally and a craft fair. And like, there was a watermelon eating contest. I think maybe there was a pie eating contest later. And there was a silent auction for pies that were made by locals. So that was cool. And there was a kids craft market, which I thought was really cute and sweet, supporting future entrepreneurs. And, it was all their crafts and it was really cool. There were a bunch of small businesses with tents and tables, which sure, that's good too. But I don't know. I just felt like it was a giant craft fair with food trucks. It didn't feel like a 250th birthday celebration of our nation. And I also kind of assumed or hoped that with the Air Force bases and the academy right here in town, that there would be something bigger. And maybe I'm not correlating two things correctly, but either way, no carnival. I couldn't find very many parades. There were a few in some smaller neighboring towns. And I know that the fires and the drought definitely dampened a lot of plans, probably for some insane fireworks shows that we could have gotten. But I don't know. It just felt like nothing was really being celebrated. And to be fair, at the ranch down the road, they had something going on. They do it every year, like a big family fun day, and they have it's at a living museum. And so they put on the show and do all the demonstrations and stuff. But you have to pay just to get in. So you can't even just go and walk around and like see things. You have to pay to get in, and then everything inside costs money as well. So I don't know. I guess that is pretty American at the end of the day. But also back to my theory, just to add to it, I was seeing a lot of throwbacks to celebrations past when I was scrolling online. I was seeing old carnivals, rides, popcorn, corn on the cob, flags, pie, presentations and plays and concerts, just collective communities celebrating together. And I wasn't getting that vibe this year. I did, however, while having my second banana split in less than a week, see a woman dressed as George Washington. So hats off to her because she was definitely bringing some whimsy to the 4th of July celebrations. And then on top of that, I was seeing all the crazy weather. What was up with that? We had a historic heat wave over most of the country, coupled with severe thunderstorms and flooding all over too. I think very few states had ideal weather. It was wild. Anyway, all that rambling to say, I still had a good 4th of July. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, being a wet blanket. I did have a good 4th of July. Like I said, I got my banana split, and we did get to watch instead of fireworks. I mean, we got to see a couple fireworks because people were still, doing their thing. But aside from that, we got to watch this insane lightning storm. And then there was a laser show very faintly in the distance, and that was pretty cool. And at the end of the day, really, this has taught me that I can't expect there to be whimsy at celebrations anymore. I need to bring my own whimsy, and I plan to do that not just for the 4th of July, but I think for every celebration. And you know how I said at the beginning of all of this podcasting shenanigans that I've decided to start doing? I said that I was going to embrace the cringe. Do you remember that if you've been listening? And I think that goes hand in hand with embracing the whimsy too. And speaking of whimsy, today's episode was suggested by Joy. Joy wanted a deep dive into how heat correlates with crime. So, when it's hotter, we've heard murders increase, crime increases. So I'm going to be talking about the heat aggression hypothesis, the routine activity theory, and the negative effect escape model, just to name a few. And now, the whimsy of all of this, you might be wondering? Well, her suggestion got me thinking. So the weather may or may not correlate with crime. What else seems to have a really big effect on humans? The moon. And what's more whimsy than the moon? People say it affects us too, kind of like the weather. You've heard it before. There's a full moon tonight, a lot of crazy drivers. Or there's a full moon tonight, so the ER is going to be crazy busy. Or, even more whimsical, werewolves. And fun fact, I was born under a full moon, a supermoon. Eek! What does it mean? We'll get into it. Thanks again, Joy, for the suggestion. Okay, so first up, does the heat actually affect crime? The idea that heat waves and high temps go hand in hand isn't just a story handed down for generations. It's not just some folklore. In general, the idea is quite simple. We've heard this before. It gets hot, people get irritable people do more violent stuff. You might have even felt a version of this yourself. You're sweaty, you're stuck in traffic, maybe your AC is not working, someone cuts you off, and you have a reaction that you, when you think about it, probably wouldn't have had in October. Turns out that feeling isn't just a feeling, and the statistics are staggering. So when the thermometer spikes, violent crime spikes right along with it. Bing, bang, boom, the proof is in the pudding, aka the millions of graphs that I've seen. Psychologists actually call this the heat aggression hypothesis or the temperature aggression theory. The idea is that higher heat raises physical stress in the body, and that stress lowers the threshold for frustration that eventually just turns into aggression. Basically, when it's hot out, your fuse gets shorter. And we actually have a very crucial piece of data that proves this physical stress angle. Scientists wanted to figure out if heat directly makes us violent or if it just kind of forces us outside to cross paths more often. So researchers did a massive study tracking daily violence inside prisons in Mississippi. Now, inmates are in a captive population. They aren't going out to the street corners or bars. Their environment is fixed. And these specific facilities didn't have air conditioning. The study found that on days when the heat index hit unsafe levels, violent interactions inside the prison jumped by a massive 20%. Because their routine didn't change, it served as proof to the theory, and that is heat alone, trapped in a room, causes human chemistry to snap. And it's not just one study. There's a study out of Finland that tracked violent crime from 1996 to 2013, and they found temperature explained about 10% of the variation in violent crime rates. For every degree Celsius, yeah, I know we do Fahrenheit, whatever. For every degree Celsius the temperature went up, violent crime went up about 1.7%. And they didn't stop at, oh, it's hot, people are cranky. They actually looked at what might be happening biologically. They studied serotonin transporter levels in the brains of both offenders and regular people, and they found that as temperatures rose, those levels shifted in a way that's linked to more impulsivity. So the theory isn't just heat equals bad mood. It's that heat may actually be nudging the chemistry that keeps us from acting on our worst impulses. Researchers also looked at 8 American cities and found a very real, measurable link between rising temperatures and both assault and robbery rates. This actually ties into another concept called the routine activity theory, which usually argues that crime goes up because nice weather changes our daily habits and draws more people outside, creating more opportunities for trouble. And honestly, you can see this theory play out in really the most mundane ways. Let's say, for instance, it's blistering hot outside. Maybe you don't have AC. What do? You open your windows. You leave the bedroom window cracked at night for that sweet breeze, that sweet release from the heat you've been suffering in all day. Maybe you leave your car windows rolled down a bit while you run into the store so it doesn't turn into a literal oven. Criminologists actually point out that criminals are mostly opportunists. An open window completely removes the physical barrier of a house or a car. It's why FBI and Bureau of Justice data shows that home burglaries jump by over 10% during the summer. The heat changes our routine. We open the windows to breathe, and we accidentally hand the opportunity right to them. And actually, these researchers found the heat crime link even after they filtered out those obvious seasonal patterns. In Chicago specifically, they found a really strong correlation, like 0.84 out of 1 between air temperature and criminal damage. So that's a very strong number for something that's this messy to study. Now, to try and explain how far this goes, some scientists proposed the negative effect escape model. This theory basically says that as it gets warm, crime goes up, but once it gets insanely hot, crime should drop because people just want to escape the heat and lie in front of a fan. But as we just learned with the Chicago and Finland data, we don't magically just chill out when it hits 100 degrees. We just stay angry. And to complicate this a little bit more, we have to look at how we behave when we are hot. Studies tracking heat waves have noted that when temperatures rise, alcohol consumption rises right along with it. We're at weekend barbecues, we're just trying to cool down. In one massive data set tracking this, a whopping 29% of all weather-induced crimes were committed by people who were actively drunk. So he kind of acts as this double whammy. The temperature lowers your brain's impulse control biologically, and then the extra drinks we use to beat the heat completely erases whatever impulse control that we had left, if any left. There's also a really interesting something here that I was kind of focusing in on, which is that the heat crime connection is not the same everywhere. A study out of LA found the relationship between heat and crime was significantly stronger in poorer neighborhoods, which makes sense when you think about it. If you have air conditioning and a pool and the option to just stay inside on a bad day, heat is an inconvenience at best. If you don't have those options, heat becomes something that you're stuck living inside of, and that changes how people behave. And weirdly enough, this connection is most pronounced when the heat strikes at the wrong time. A study tracked what happens during sudden, unseasonal spikes in temperature and found that when a winter day experiences a massive freak upward swing in heat, homicides and robberies rose by a staggering 30.8%. A random 70-degree day in January disrupts our behavior and routine far more drastically than a 90-degree day in July because our infrastructure and our minds aren't ready for it. Now, to be fair here, because not every study agrees, a review across 15 US cities over 14 years found the correlation between temperature and crime was actually pretty weak in a lot of cases, which suggests other stuff like income, unemployment, whether school's in session. Those matter just as much, if not more, according to this study. So, like many things that I question and research, this isn't a very clean, undeniable law of nature. It's more like heat is just kind of this single ingredient in a much larger recipe. The evidence for that isn't really in dispute necessarily, though. So when your grandma says everybody loses their mind when it's hot, she's not wrong. She's basically citing peer-reviewed research, and maybe she doesn't even know it. Or maybe she does. Grandmas are really smart. So if the sun's binding heat can physically alter our brain chemistry and shrink our fuses during the day, what happens when the sun goes down, when the temperature drops and the moon takes over? Because if you think the data on heat waves is wild, the stuff surrounding the moon is where things get truly mystical, whimsical actually. We've heard it all before. There must be a full moon tonight. It's what your local ER nurse says when the waiting room suddenly descends into complete chaos. It's what cops say when the dispatch lines start lighting up with bizarre complaints. It's what teachers swear by when their normally sweet third graders start bouncing off the walls. And honestly, your mom might even say it before you head out for a drive somewhere. Look out for crazy drivers, it's a full moon. And of course, if you want to take it all the way to the edge of the whimsy scale, like I mentioned earlier, werewolves. Eek! And kind of related to werewolves, a tiny bit. Maybe. Maybe not. But there is an actual formal term for this in psychology and criminology. It's called the Transylvania effect, which I guess that's more vampires than werewolves, but whatever. It's also called the lunar lunacy effect. It's the deeply ingrained cultural belief that the human psyche fractures just a little bit when the moon is 100% illuminated. But where on earth did we get this idea? It turns out this theory isn't just a modern urban legend. It stretches back thousands of years. And this is something that I was so excited to get into because I feel like this belief runs so deep that even people who consider themselves logical, smart, whatever, they still kind of believe it, at least a little bit. Cops believe it, nurses believe it, moms believe it, so many people believe it. Does the moon actually do anything, though? The short answer is no. Sadly. The long answer, well, let's actually go through it because the story of why we believe this is honestly more interesting to me than if it were true. So, researchers have thrown a lot at this. Crime rates, ER visits, psychiatric admissions, suicide attempts, dog bites, seizures, sleepwalking, even how busy poison control hotlines get. And over, the pattern is the same. Most well-designed studies find nothing. One team even pulled 5 years of 911 dispatch data, everything from assaults to burglaries to drug calls, and lined it up against the lunar calendar. No correlation. A group called BetaGov did something similar as well, just with police data out of Vallejo, California, and then replicated it with police departments in Ontario and Mexico, just to make sure it wasn't like a fluke of just this one city. And they got the same result across all three. Nothing. On the medical side, one of the biggest studies on this looked at almost 55,000 trauma-related ER visits over 13 months in Iran. No difference in how many people came in or how badly hurt they were on full moon nights versus really any other night. A Canadian study looked at crisis calls to police and poison centers specifically during full moons. Nothing. Another review looked at suicide attempts specifically, and nothing there either. There is one small exception, and I do think it's worth mentioning because it's the one place that the vibe might have a kernel of truth. A 2013 sleep study found that people slept about 20 minutes less on average around the full moon, even in a lab with no windows and no way to see the actual moon. Nobody fully knows why. Some researchers think that it might be tied to that ancient leftover rhythm in our biology. So if you feel a little more restless or a little more off around the full moon, that part might not be pure imagination. Being restless and underslept is a long way from a violent crime spike or a packed ER, though. But why do we all believe it anyway? This is the most fascinating part to me. If the data says no, why does basically every nurse, cop, and bartender you've ever met insist it's real? The answer is a mix of confirmation bias and something almost structural about how memory works. If a full moon is chaotic, everyone clocks it because they were primed to expect chaos. Called it full moon. If a full moon night is peaceful and quiet, nobody says anything because there's nothing to comment on. Nobody walks out of a boring Tuesday shift going, wow, so calm and it was a full moon, wild. The quiet nights just kind of disappear from memory, but the wild ones, they get filed under proof. Remember, we love to find patterns, and over enough shifts or enough times of experiencing a crazy night when it's a full moon, your brain builds a pattern that, unfortunately, was never actually even there. It was just built out of the nights you happened to remember. And like I said, this belief is old, like ancient. The very word lunatic comes from Luna, the Roman goddess of the moon. Aristotle and Pliny the Elder, two of the most respected minds of the ancient world, by the way, argued that the brain was, the wettest, the most moist organ in the body. And since the moon controls tides, it must also be pulling on the fluid in our heads. Maybe it sounds ridiculous to you. Maybe it sounds like plausible. This was taken very seriously for centuries. But the problem is, that's just not really quite how it works. There's a great line about this, something about how like a mosquito landing on your arm exerts more gravitational pull on your body than the moon does. And that's because your body's not an ocean. There's no tide happening in your skull. Now, this belief that the moon transforms people didn't stay in medical textbooks of ancient times. It went straight into folklore, and that's where we get werewolves. Here's the twist, though. The full moon werewolf, the one who only transforms once a month under a big glowing moon, that's actually mostly a Hollywood invention. In actual old European folklore, werewolf transformations weren't tied to the moon phase at all. People turn into werewolves because of a curse, or because they were bitten, or because they made a deal with something or someone they shouldn't have, or honestly, they just changed whenever they felt like it. Some legends actually tied transformations to the winter solstice or Easter instead. Talk about a crazy twist on Easter. Jesus rose from the tomb as a werewolf. Wouldn't that be insane? In Norse mythology, warriors literally wore wolf pelts in order to summon that wolf strength, and no moon was required for that, just the pelt. The full moon didn't really get attached to the werewolf myth until Universal horror films in the 20th century, but it stuck so hard that most of us now assume it was always part of the legend. I know I did, but it wasn't. It's basically fan fiction that became canon. But the underlying fear behind werewolves is old and real. Think about it, whether you're thinking about werewolves or not, this idea that under the right conditions, an ordinary person could lose control and become something dangerous. It's scary. The full moon just kind of became this thing to kind of attach the thought of something is about to go wrong tonight too. And that's kind of poetic in a way. I mean, we built centuries of mythology around this big light in the sky having zero measurable effect on us because the story of losing control to something bigger than ourselves, is a lot more satisfying than, oh, sometimes people are just having a bad night for normal, boring reasons. A little side note here. I did think about howling just for like theatrical reasons, but I'll spare you. I'll spare my sanity. But since we're already this deep into moon lore, I wanted to do like a full rundown of the moons because the full moons, because I actually didn't really know about a lot of this. I didn't know that most years have 12 full moons, one per month. That's probably very common knowledge, but I did not know that until I started deep diving. However, this year, 2026, is a 13 moon year, and that extra moon is what gives us a blue moon. Eek! Another little side note here. I've been getting so much Summerween stuff in my algorithm, and I feel like this is kind of adding to it. Like, I'm embracing the cringe, I'm embracing the whimsy, and I think I'm embracing Summerween. It's very nostalgic, it's very fun. It's also cringy and whimsical, but I'm here for it. I love it. Anyway, let's go over the full moons of 2026 and where the names actually come from. So first up this year on January 3rd, we had a wolf moon, and this was named for wolves howling more in the dead of winter. People used to think that it was because they were starving, which is so sad to think about. And I mean, it's cold. Maybe they were low on food. Maybe they were a bit more hungry, but they just howl more this time of year for territorial reasons. But nevertheless, the name stuck. Then on February 1st was the snow moon. It's about as literal as it gets. This is typically the snowiest month in a lot of the country. Then on March 3rd was the worm moon. You guys, last year, not around this time of year, but at some point last year, I had Holden at the dog park. It was nighttime, and I had my flashlight because people in dog parks don't like to pick up after their dogs, so I have to watch my every step. Whatever. I looked down, and this big ass, thick, girthy worm literally moved at the speed of light. It was so disgusting. Anyway, the worm moon marks the ground starting to thaw. And obviously, when the ground thaws, the earthworms come back to the surface, and that brings the birds back. Basically, it's the first real sign that spring is coming. This year, it also coincided with a total lunar eclipse. So it was a worm moon and a blood moon at the same time. Ew, a bloody worm moon. Oh, gross. Respect to the earthworms, though. Love their craft. Anyway, on April 1st, we had the pink moon, and I tried climbing a little bit. Not really. I was just kind of like hanging out of the car window. I was trying to take a picture of it from a parking lot, but whatever. And the pink moon isn't named because the moon looks pink, which I personally thought that it still kind of looked a little bit pinkish, and that's why I wanted to take a picture of it so badly. But it's named after a wildflower called moss phlox, and moss phlox blooms very bright and pink around this time of year. Then on May 1st was the flower moon. I mean, this one's kind of obvious too, named for, well, everything's blooming. It's May. And then on May 31st was the blue moon. This is the second full moon in May, which is what makes it a blue moon by the modern definition, meaning 2 full moons in one single month. But I'll get into the crazy backstory of how we got that definition shortly, because I'm sure you've heard once in a blue moon. And then most recently, on Pook's birthday, June 29th, was the strawberry moon. That's the one that I fell off a playground trying to take a picture of in the middle of the night. I digress. My hand is still healing. This marks strawberry harvesting season, and pretty much every tribe that tracked this moon used some version of this name. And then coming up for the rest of the year, we still have 6 more full moons. July 29th will be the buck moon. This is named for male deer whose antlers are in full growth mode at this time of the year. The other night, on the 4th, we were walking along, and there were 4 bucks hanging out. Cole named one of them Macy, and they're just all Macy now. Anyway, then on August 28th, we will have the sturgeon moon. This was named after sturgeon fish, which used to be much more plentiful in the Great Lakes this time of year. I don't know if it's still like that, but if you fish, maybe head up to the Great Lakes if you don't already. If you can, I don't know fishing laws. Sturgeons are like dinosaurs also. I don't know. Anyway, this one lines up with a partial lunar eclipse. And then in September on the 26th, we will have the harvest moon. And this is the full moon that lands closest to the fall equinox. And it's extra special because it rises around sunset for several nights in a row, which used to let farmers keep working in the fields after dark. It's also sometimes called the corn moon. And then on October 26th, close to Halloween, we will have the hunter's moon. Eek, scary. Not because I think hunters are scary. I was just thinking of like scary movie hunters like Freddy and Jason and all them. Anyway, the first full moon after the harvest moon is the hunter's moon, October 26th. And this is traditionally when the extra light was used for hunting to stock up before winter. And then in November, around Thanksgiving, we will have the beaver moon. And the name came either from beavers building their winter dams or from this being the time that trappers used to set beaver traps before the water froze. And then lastly, on December 23rd, we will have the cold moon. Self-explanatory. I mean, it's cold around Christmas time. Now, I got these names from the Old Farmer's Almanac, which has been publishing this specific list since the 1930s. And it's kind of basically why these are the names that have stuck in mainstream culture. But most are rooted in Algonquin tribal traditions from the northeastern U.S. However, colonial Americans and Europeans added their own versions too, and different tribes had completely different names for the same moon. January's moon wasn't even a Native American name originally. It's thought to have English roots. So you might know these moons as other names, and you're right. But anyway, speaking of mainstream culture, I said I'd explain the blue moon, so let's get into it. The phrase actually doesn't mean what most people think it means, and the origin story is quite interesting, if you ask me. So it actually has nothing to do with the moon turning blue. Ding dong, I thought it did. And it actually wasn't even originally about astronomy at all. So back in the 1500s, yeah, we're going back, 1500s, there was a saying of the moon is blue. And this was just a sarcastic way of saying something was very obviously fake, kind of similar to pigs will fly. Like, it's so obviously false and it's never going to happen. And there's a written example from 1528 basically mocking people for believing something absurd. And it said, if they say the moon is blue, we must believe it's true. But like they're saying it sarcastically. Over the centuries, that morphed from this impossible thing into, oh, it's a thing that happens, but like extremely rare, but it happens sometimes. And then by 1821, there's a written example that uses it almost exactly like we do today. Someone saying that they haven't seen a friend this blue moon, it means that they haven't seen their friend in a while. It's been a long time. So it's kind of similar to like it only happens once in a blue moon, like very rarely. And then the modern astronomical definition, the second full moon in a single calendar month. You remember that one? What I talked about a little bit earlier? Well, it actually came from a mistake. That's right, a mistake. I have been seeing kind of a theme, no, pattern, trend, I don't know, in a lot of these episodes that mistakes often lead to cool things. So in 1946, a writer for Sky and Telescope misread an old Maine almanac and published the, quote, second full moon in a month definition. And it just stuck, probably because it later got used as a Trivial Pursuit answer, whatever. The original almanac definition, though, was actually about the third full moon in a season that has 4 instead of the usual 3. which is honestly just a lot more confusing. So the quote unquote wrong version obviously was going to win because it was much more simpler. Second full moon in a month versus whatever I said earlier. I already confused myself. So basically, our most well known moon fact is built on a decades old typo that got famous. And either way, it happens roughly once every 2 to 3 years, which is honestly not even that rare, but once in a blue moon sounds a lot better than once every 32 months, statistically speaking. And then to answer the simplest question that I kept coming back to while researching, why is it called a blue moon? Like the word blue, it's not blue, right? Well, guess what? It's actually kind of another mistake, which makes the typo mistake kind of perfect. Well, okay, so it's not really like a mistake, it's more of a linguistic issue, but whatever. Back in the Middle Ages, an extra moon completely messed up the church's calendar for Easter. So monks called it a blue moon, spelled Belewe. That meant betrayer moon in Old English. Over the centuries, obviously that word fell out of use, but maybe we should bring it back. He's a blue, a betrayer. Oh, I think I'm going to use it. Anyway, obviously it sounded exactly like the color blue, so the name just kind of stuck. It's kind of fun, right? So just to recap, because I kind of took you all over the place there. A normal calendar year gives us 12 full moons, one for each month. But because the moon's orbit doesn't perfectly match our calendar months, every 2 to 3 years, the universe throws a 13th moon into the mix, a bonus moon. Historically, it was called a betrayer moon because it sneaked into the season and betrayed the church's timeline. Then language transformed it into a blue moon. And then, hundreds of years later, an astronomy magazine made a mistake, looked at that extra moon, and declared that a blue moon must mean the second full moon in a single month. So when you look back at May 31st this year, you were looking at a modern calendar typo, a medieval calendar glitch, and a centuries-old language accident all rolled into one giant glowing nightlight. I mean, when you think about it, it only happens every once in a blue moon. Huh? Okay, so now I want to talk about me because I recently realized I was born under a full moon. And not just a full moon, a supermoon. And I wanted to know what it meant, if anything. But before we dive into my exact chart, if we are going to fully embrace the whimsy of the sky, I thought that we should also talk about the vocabulary of special moons because a supermoon is just kind of one flavor of the moons. You've probably heard of a blood moon, which is the dramatic nickname for a total lunar eclipse. This happens when the Earth passes directly between the sun and the moon, cutting off direct sunlight. The only light that reaches the moon's surface is filtered through the Earth's atmosphere, which scatters the blue wavelengths and projects a deep, coppery red glow onto the moon. It's literally, and this is so beautiful, you guys, it's literally the light of every sunrise and every sunset on Earth reflecting into the night sky. Oh, like now the blood moon doesn't sound so scary. It just sounds so beautiful. We're seeing reflections of other sunsets and other sunrises around the world. It's so sweet. And then every once in a long while, which honestly, every once in a blue moon, only this isn't a blue moon, the universe really shows off and we get a super blood wolf moon, which is an extreme celestial trifecta where a January full moon, an orbital perigee close up, and a total lunar eclipse all crash into the same night sky. That's sick, right? Also, because I didn't know this either, an orbital perigee is the point in a satellite or a celestial body's elliptical orbit when it's closest to the Earth. If that makes sense to anybody, because I'm still a little bit confused, but whatever. It's still cool. But then what about the simple classic full moon? So let's start with the basic astrology of being born on a full moon. So Anybody listening, if you were born on a full moon, perk your ears if you don't already know this. So when you're born during this phase, your sun sign and your moon sign are sitting in direct opposition to each other in the sky. Astrologers describe this as your logical mind and your emotional heart being kind of at odds, which honestly relatable because like I said, I was born on a full moon. My sun is in Capricorn and my moon is in Cancer. They're opposites on the chart. The idea is that full moon babies, aka me, and I relate to this, live with this constant internal negotiation between what they know they should do and what they actually feel like doing. Across a bunch of different astrology sources, full moon people get described basically the same handful of ways over and over. We're called emotionally intense, magnetic, creative, bad at hiding how we feel, but in a good way because we wear it all on our sleeve instead of bottling it up. We're known as natural mediators, supposedly, because being born under the two opposing forces, it kind of makes you good at seeing both sides of an argument, which I consider myself very good at doing. And apparently, we make up somewhere between 3 and 10% of the population, depending on how tightly you define born on the full moon versus born sometime during the full moon phase. So it's uncommon, yes, but it's not some rare 1 in a million thing. And if you want to know anything about me, I love finding out when something about me is rare because I love feeling unique. That's probably very like pick me, but whatever. Like I got green eyes, that's kind of rare. I think that's pretty much it. And then being born under a full moon. Anyway, different cultures have their own spin on this too. So in Hinduism, a full moon birth is considered auspicious, which historically associates them with spiritual leaders. And this means that they're favored for success or just a positive future is probably going to be more likely for them. And I would like that to be true. And then Native American traditions often connect it to wisdom and a strong pull toward nature, which I also think I agree with. And then in Wicca, the full moon represents the goddess at her most powerful. So being born under it is seen as basically like an alignment with that energy specifically, like her energy specifically. Now, for the super part, because as you know, as I mentioned, I was born under a supermoon. I actually went and I looked up my exact birthday because originally I wasn't expecting much. My Stardust app did tell me it was a full moon and it said red moon, but it's different. That means I menstruate on full moons. So that's why they called it a red moon because, blood. But otherwise it didn't actually specify what kind of moon I was born under. So I was under the assumption I was born under a blood moon, but I was not. It turns out that the super moon was the super wolf moon. Like, growing up, Twilight, I thought I was Team Edward. And as I got older, I definitely became more Team Jacob. And things are just making a lot more sense now. Anyway, so to be exact with the super wolf moon, it was a full moon in Cancer. So remember, it's my exact opposite. And it happened to land at perigee. Perigee. I'm not too sure how that's pronounced, but it means the moon was at its closest point to Earth for that entire orbit. Now, for a little science on what that actually means, because supermoon, it kind of gets thrown around a lot without much explanation. So the moon's orbit isn't a perfect circle. It's called an ellipse. So some months it swings closer to Earth and some months it swings farther out. And when a full moon lines up with that close point, it can actually look up to 7% bigger and noticeably brighter than a regular full moon. Honestly, I felt like the strawberry moon was like that. And that would make sense because it was Cancer season on June 29th, but the full moon was in Capricorn. So I wonder if it was a supermoon. I might have to go back. Maybe I already said that. You guys, it's late. Anyway, the term itself isn't ancient. An astrologer named Richard Knoll, he actually coined it in 1979. So real astronomers still just kind of call it a perigee or perigee. I don't really remember how it's pronounced. Perigee full moon. Supermoon is very much just like the popular nickname that just kind of stuck. Kind of like how blue moon beat out the original almanac definition. Patterns, guys. I'm making connections. But here's another part that I didn't expect. There's actually a documented physical effect tied to supermoons, and this one is not made up. So, because the moon is closer, its gravitational pull on Earth's ocean is slightly stronger, which creates what's called a king tide. And this is a very real, very measurable, unusually high tide. So unlike the full moon crime and ER stuff that we just, broke down, this is one lunar claim that isn't just folklore or vibes. I mean, it's not tied to us, but there's an actual tide chart to prove it. Now, onto the astrology side, since obviously that's the fun part. Being born on a full moon already means that your sun and moon signs are in opposition, that logical mind versus emotional heart tension that I mentioned earlier. Astrologers say a supermoon takes that same full moon energy and just turns that shit up. So it's not a different kind of energy necessarily, it's just a louder, more amplified version of it. The words that show up over and over across different astrology sources are heightened, intense, and emotionally visible, meaning whatever a regular full moon baby feels, a supermoon baby reportedly finds it just a little harder to ignore and a little harder to hide from other people as well. There's also this idea that a supermoon works like a spotlight on whatever you've been avoiding or suppressing. The theory is that anything you've been pushing down just comes up faster and clearer under this kind of energy, since the whole point of a supermoon astrologically is amplification, not subtlety. So it kind of makes sense, right? So where does that leave me? Okay. Remember, we're talking about me here, a full moon baby, just the extra loud version. And speaking of being extra loud, my mom did tell me, and I don't know if she meant this or if this was just like a misremembering, but I could have sworn my mom told me that I was the loudest baby in the hospital when I was born. And if that's true, that kind of aligns with being a supermoon baby, feeling life a little bit louder. Now, I'm not going to necessarily say that any of this truly shaped who I am. I mean, I do believe in a lot of astrology, but regardless, between the actual measurable king tide and, the quote unquote louder, more intense, harder to hide your feelings personality read, I'll admit that both of those track a little too well for me to fully write it off. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's got to be a connection. And I also feel like it's why I don't fit as neatly into a Capricorn's definition. Like, anytime somebody's talking about Capricorns, I feel like we're always told that we're just these cold-hearted individuals that just focus on success and that we're boring. Like, it's always like, oh, what's a Capricorn's ice cream? Vanilla. No, bitch. I want more than vanilla. Anyway, I always felt that I aligned a lot with Cancer, actually. So learning this kind of explained that and validated my thoughts a little bit. Also, Cole is a Cancer, and I feel like we really kind of balance each other out. I should have him figure out what time he was born so we can look at his chart someday. You let me know if you want to hear Pook's chart. Anyway, I took you all on another journey that is my mind. Joy wanted to talk about heat and crime and how they relate, and that led me to thinking about how people also say the moon affects us, and that led me to the full moons and to some astrology, and now we're here. Maybe you're kind of getting an idea of how my brain works. I don't know. As you can tell, I did not do a news recap again. To be honest, well, one, I'm not recording same day anymore. I'm trying to record this at least a couple days ahead of time because your girl is working at the zoo now. Eek! And yeah, I haven't really been feeling the news lately. I don't know. I've just been feeling like I want to take you all on little adventures in my mind with me. And you know what? Hey, it's my show. And if you don't like what I'm doing, I dare you to DM me. My DMs are still very much open and empty. You can find me on Instagram at indistinct.pod or at Eliza Hollister. But also, if you want to interact with me, you can say nice things too. You don't have to just like complain. Or you could tell me about your charts. I love learning about astrology and I love to see how the stars and the moon may or may not relate to people. It's so fun. And sometimes I'm like, is this a coincidence or is it divine accuracy? Eek! If you liked this episode, please rate, review, comment, all that good stuff. Whatever platform you're listening on, whatever it lets you do, please do it. If you have mystical whimsy friends that can give me more insight into the moon and stars and astrology, hey, why don't you go ahead and send this to them and let them know that I would love to discuss and learn more. I hope you all had a wonderful, fun 4th of July. My cat is currently knocking things down off of a shelf. Not sure if you could hear that. And I hope that you take some whimsy with you into your next celebration and honestly, just taking it with you throughout life. We will chat next week. Love ya. Love you. Bye.